Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Esoteric Babble. Today's babbling is going to center around The Matrix, the film The Matrix, the first film, The Matrix. I should make that kind of clear. And the concept of liberation as found in Buddhism and Vedanta, even Gnosticism, Neoplatonism. Now, The Matrix is not an unknown film by any means. It's a fabulous film. And to people who, I don't think it took a whole lot of incisive insight or inquiry to realize that the movie was possibly about more than just the action that it portrayed on screen. And I think how it's been interpreted by most people is that it's an allegory of systems of control. And it certainly works. You know, we all find ourselves in some sort of society where we are regulated and etc. And I think that that's a very, that reading of the film is very justified. But I think that it also can be understood as we can understand it as it relates to the concepts of liberation or spiritual liberation. And this is one thing that I'm going to just throw out there that I think is interesting about The Matrix, and it applies to certain sorts of spiritual practices. And that is that belief is not enough. So let's think about The Matrix for a minute. You could, in the universe there, you could, in The Matrix, go and tell people that they were actually, like, hey, your body is actually in some big, it's submerged in some gelatinous fluid, and you are actually, you have all kinds of tubes in you, or a tube, I don't know how many actually, but and you are the power source. You are feeding your life, your whatever we would say, maybe your metabolism is feeding this is the main power source for this computer sort of or mechanized society. Without proving that to anyone, without in any way being able to demonstrate that, people could believe you or not, and it would just be a matter of speculation. And you might be able to, just as now people, when people talk about The Matrix now, I should say that as opposed to my claim that this is about systems of control. Now, when people talk about The Matrix, we talk about we live in some sort of computer simulation created by some super sentient race. But the idea is, in both of these cases, actually, that believing that isn't quite enough. We can have interesting discussions about it, but in the film, Morpheus does not try to convince Neo. He actually shows him. He takes him out of the Matrix. And I think that applies to the spiritual situation. For those who are on, and I would say Buddhists in general, the more or less Buddhism, Vedanta, as well as the aforementioned Neoplatonism, Gnosticism, really any sort of mystic, any person who is seeking mystical union is attempting to attain a state of being, or a state that transcends being. This is very different than, say, worshiping a god, or even thinking that perhaps heaven is being near that god, but you basically retain all the characteristics of you. that I think is very important, and I think that's a very interesting thing to take away from the Matrix, is that this state, we could talk about it, but we actually have to find a way to escape the Matrix. And the good news there is that there are many paths, there are many teachings, and there are many paths that supposedly lead us out of this Matrix, if we're going to use that sort of vocabulary. And basically, I would say that let's really, focus in on, I think, the way the Buddha looks at it. And I always go back to the opening of the Dhammapada, where it says, Mano Pubangama Dhamma Mano Setta Mano Maya. And my Pali is not by any means amazing, but in this case, Dhamma, meaning like phenomena are preceded by mind, Mano. They're governed by mind, and they are made by, the mind. And in this case, it's really our mind. A good takeaway from that is really, when it comes down to it, that the reality that we perceive is ultimately a creation of our mind. It's even, there's a name for it, I think, in Sanskrit, the ahankara, the I-making. There's like an I-making thought that gets in there. So, in short, if you can kind of get beyond the mind, or even behind the mind, if you can, and let me finish that thought. If you can get beyond the mind, beyond the body, beyond any sort of mental process, any sort of thing that you can think of that's you should, according to the Buddha, then be in a position where you would reach nirvana. People could quibble over this. I am clearly no Buddhist monk. If you have some differing opinions, please share them. But fundamentally, one course of action the Buddha seems to take is always to remind us not to identify with our bodies, not actually to identify with any physical objects, whether it's, we'll make it modern times, our car, our computer, a tree we've planted, our fingernails, the bones in our body, our heart, anything. None of that is actually us. That is the whole point of anatta. It's not me. It's not mine. It's not me. I can't find my I-ness there. And talked about this before, but the reason for that is, if it were me, first of all, it would abide. It wouldn't be subject to change, for it to be, real in that sense. Nor would it be something that should in any way be out of my control. If something is mine, I should be able to tell my body to heal itself, and it would. If I had a finger cut off, I could say, finger, grow back. I can't do that. And even, we could as people just say, well, you know what, food, I'm not interested in paying for food anymore. I'll just never eat, and I don't need oxygen. No, we can't do that. There are these requirements our body, there are requirements that our body needs. And so the Buddha would say, if we can't bring it under our control, then it's not us. And all that applies to our mental faculties, memories, consciousness, sensations, and so on and so forth. So disengaging ourselves from that, understanding, and not just mentally. I mean, mentally, like, that would, to me, be part of right view on the Eightfold Path. That would set the stage. Something I will go to a neighboring path, the Vedantist, Shankaracharya. He says in the Atmabodha specifically that ignorance, it cannot be countered by anything except knowledge, except by learning. You can't meditate your way out of ignorance because, or he said, any action. Action is not opposed to ignorance. So unless your action is learning, I suppose. So back to the Buddha, that if we understand first that we are not our physical bodies, our mental bodies, or any of that, and then, of course, we have to meditate and try to experience that reality. And again, the claim is that in so doing, that should at least put us on, theoretically, I think if we could disengage from all of that, we would probably attain nirvana. Now, there are some other issues involved, and of course, I'm greatly simplifying things. There's the issue of the three taints, the poisons, the ideas of greed, anger, hatred, and delusion, that while we have these, we will not be able to attain liberation. So another way to say it is, if we get rid of the three taints, we will reach nirvana, the deathless path. So you could see those two things as being like, if we get rid of one, we'll be getting rid of the other. If we get rid of this idea that I am my physical body, then we should be able to get rid of the taints. Now, another way to look at this whole situation is, of course, the Buddha framed everything within this understanding that all is suffering, that the reality we experience is, if not always painful, it's, and I forget the name of the, I'll try to put his name in the link, but he said, a good word for that is just bummer. Like, reality's just, good things are going to come to an end, and there's always going to be something that, can go wrong. Loved ones, are going to die, and there's all this stuff. So that being the case, the Buddha has a path to liberation, the Eightfold Path. And one thing, when the teaching about suffering, the Four Noble Truths, it's often mentioned that craving is, desire is the root. Certain types of desire cause suffering. But if you go on and look a little deeper, I would say that the Buddha, in the Paticca Samuppada, in the dependent origination, really just says that fundamentally everything arises. The entire universe that we know and experience comes about because of avidya, because of ignorance. And that is the real root of our cravings and our taints and whatnot. So the path, the Buddha's path, and any path really, is to eliminate that ignorance, with the kind of the removal of which should bring us into contact with this other reality. Now, I have not had that experience. I've had a very close experience, and I felt at the time I was reading a lot of Zen, and you wouldn't have to read too far in Zen. I don't remember the exact person where I read it, but they talked about it as being the little death, or like the bottom dropping out. And that's how I felt. I had one experience where it just seemed like I was very close, but it was actually kind of frightening at the time, and that's where I left it. I think that, I guess what I'm getting at, though, is that the description of liberation is not any longer a sense of I and other. It is non-dual. That's kind of the buzzword. The Advaita is the, it's non-dual Vedanta. There's Vedanta that's dual as well. And of course, if we think about it, if we're removing the I and we see that it sort of is illusory, then that's probably what's left, an experience of this state of allness. I'll bring up one other thing that I think is interesting, and I think I'm going to cut this one short, and probably we'll make a follow-up to this, because I doubt I've covered everything that I should. The Buddha mentions in the Udana, I think it's at the end of the first chapter, it deals with Bahira, a person, someone who was, I think, maybe regarded as a saint. But anyway, he was not a charlatan. He realized he was not really near emancipation. So he sought the Buddha out. And the Buddha told him, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, you can look this up in the Udana, which is part of the Pali Canon. He says, when there's seeing, let there be the seen, or when there's the heard, let there be hearing, one of those ways or the other. And he says, when you do that, there's going to be no you there. And when there's no you there, there's going to be no strife, no suffering, no stress. I really like that because I came across a quote by Rumi, and now I'm probably going to botch it, but it was so similar, where he said, if you can remove yourself, then basically you have union. He says it very poetically, of course, and it's very inspiring and beautiful. But that's a place where there's a lot, there's agreement from across centuries and different cultures. And I think that is escape from the matrix. And one thing that I should have pointed out earlier when I was, this is the benefit of not using notes, but the thing about the matrix is, in this context, where is the matrix? The matrix is our mind. Our matrix is our thinking apparatus. It is our concepts. And that is what, the kind of the quote destruction, the nirodha of that, the cessation of all of that will lead us to liberation. So our matrix is every bit, if not harder, to escape from than the one portrayed in the movie. But we have, I think, good evidence that it is escapable, if you want to put it in, if we want to look at it in terms of the movie. And I think that it's worth thinking about. And that's where I'm going to leave things right now. So with a heartfelt desire for the end of suffering of all beings, I bid everyone peace.